The air in the Grand Assembly Hall of Station Unity tasted like recycled oxygen and high-stakes boredom. It was a sterile metallic taste that coated the back of the throat, reminding everyone present that they were floating in a tin can, surrounded by the infinite vacuum, arguing about tariffs on grain that had not even been planted yet. Damon Reed sat in the very last row of the amphitheater, a section reserved for species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel and were therefore considered toddlers at the galactic dinner table. He shifted in his seat, which had been designed for a species with 3 hips and a center of gravity somewhere near their knees. Damon, possessing only 2 human hips and a standard spinal column, found the ergonomics to be a personal insult. "Stop fidgeting," Ambassador Hale hissed. The older man did not look at Damon. He kept his eyes locked on the podium far below, where a representative from the Hive Mind Collective of the Krill was entering the 3rd hour of a speech regarding the standardization of shipping lane beacons in Sector 7. "I am not fidgeting," Damon whispered back, keeping his voice low enough to avoid triggering the translation drones hovering overhead. "I am losing circulation in my legs. If I do not move every 10 minutes, you are going to have to carry me back to the ship, and that will look very bad for diplomatic relations. You are here to provide security and represent the common human element," Hale replied, adjusting the collar of his stiff formal jacket. "Try to look less like a cargo pilot who is thinking about how much beer he can buy with his per diem." "I am a cargo pilot," Damon pointed out. "And I am thinking about a steak, a real one, not the protein paste they serve on the haulers." Damon leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He had been drafted into this assignment because the Earth Coalition wanted a man of the people to accompany the diplomatic corps, someone to show that humanity was a robust, practical species. In reality, Damon knew he was just a warm body filling a seat. He had taken the job for 2 reasons. First, the pay was triple what he made running helium-3 isotopes through the asteroid belt. Second, it promised 2 weeks of downtime at Station Unity, which supposedly had the best food courts in the quadrant. So far, the food had been excellent, but the downtime was non-existent. He had been dragged to 7 committee meetings, 3 cultural sensitivity seminars, and now the Grand Assembly. Below them, the Krill representative droned on. The sound was a series of clicks and buzzes that the translator earbud in Damon's ear converted into a monotone, sleep-inducing English. "If we consider the variance in gravitational distortion across the tertiary lanes," the voice in his ear said, "we must account for a 0.004% increase in fuel consumption. This is unacceptable to Krill. We demand a rebate of 2% on all toll fees to compensate for this injustice." Damon sighed, the sound escaping him like steam from a cracked valve. He scanned the massive hall. There were thousands of delegates here representing hundreds of species. There were aquatic creatures floating in suspended water spheres, silicon-based life forms that looked like sentient boulders, and avian species that perched on railings rather than sitting in chairs. "I bet you 50 credits the rock guy in row 8 falls asleep before the fish guy in row 10, Damon murmured. "There is no gambling in the Grand Assembly," Hale said through gritted teeth. "It is not gambling if it is a sure thing. Rock guy has not moved in 40 minutes. His lights are dimming." "He is photosynthesizing, Damon. Shut up." Damon closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the station. He was 34 years old, though his flight logs said he had logged enough hours in hyperspace to age a man of 50. He felt it in his joints when the artificial gravity fluctuated. He felt it in the way his brain sometimes lagged a fraction of a second behind reality, a side effect of too many unshielded jumps in second-hand ships. He was, as he often told himself, a cheap survival machine. He was built to sit in a cockpit for 3 weeks straight, eating preserved rations, dodging pirates, and calculating fuel margins down to the last liter. He was not built for politics. He opened his eyes and looked at the floating holographic displays hovering in the center of the room. Charts, graphs, numbers. It was a war fought with spreadsheets. "Do we actually have a say in any of this?" Damon asked. "We have a vote," Hale said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A vote that counts for what 0.1% of the total?" "We are building trust," Hale insisted. "We are showing them that humans are patient, observant, and respectful of the process." "We are showing them we are good at napping," Damon corrected. The Krill representative finally finished yielding the floor with a series of aggressive clicks. A ripple of polite applause moved through the hall, sounding like rain on a tin roof. The moderator, an artificial intelligence represented by a pillar of blue light, spoke next. "We thank Krill for their detailed analysis," the AI said. "Next on the agenda, we have a request for an emergency motion regarding the border dispute in the Nebula of Tears. However, before that, we are honored to recognize the arrival of the Vulpine High Delegation." The change in the room was instantaneous. It was not a sound, but a feeling. It was as if the air pressure suddenly dropped, popping ears, and sucking the breath out of lungs. The drowsy atmosphere of the trade dispute evaporated, replaced by a sharp electric tension that made the hair on Damon's arms stand up. The massive double doors at the base of the amphitheater, which had remained closed for the last 4 hours, groaned open. "Wake up!" Damon whispered to himself, sitting up straighter. Showtime, Queen Zaira of the Vulpine Dominion entered. Damon had seen hollows of her, but images did not do the reality justice. She did not just walk. She commanded the space she occupied. She was tall, standing perhaps 7 feet, her posture rigid and regal. Her fur was pure white, sleek and shimmering under the harsh lights of the assembly. She wore robes of deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb the light around her, contrasting with the gold jewelry that draped her neck and wrists. Her ears were tall and pointed, twitching with predatory alertness, and her eyes were pools of ancient, terrifying intelligence. But it was her presence that hit Damon hardest. It was a physical weight, a gravitational pull that demanded every eye in the room turn toward her. Behind her walked her entourage, guards in ceramic armor that looked more like art than protection, and advisors clutching data crystals. But behind them, trailing the queen like a shadow, was a floating projector drone. It was currently inactive, a dark sphere hovering silently. The entire assembly hall, previously filled with the murmur of thousands of beings, went deathly silent. Even Krill stopped clicking. The humans were seated so far back that Damon had to squint, but the massive screens overhead immediately zoomed in on the queen's face. She looked tired, he thought. Beneath the regality and the terrifying power, there was a tightness around her eyes, a line of tension in her jaw. She ascended the podium. The Krill representative scrambled out of her way with undignified haste. Queen Zaira placed her hands on the lectern. Her claws, sharp and manicured, clicked against the metal. "Members of the Alliance," she began. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the rafters without seeming to need the amplification system. It was a voice like velvet, wrapped around a jagged rock. "I will not come to you today to discuss taxes. I do not come to argue about hyperlane coordinates or trade embargoes." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the vast, tiered seating. When her eyes passed over the human section, Damon felt a cold shiver run down his spine, as if a predator had just decided he was too small to be a meal. "I come with a matter of the royal house," Zaira continued. "A matter of survival. My daughter, Princess Vixara, requires a consort." A murmur broke out in the hall. A royal wedding that was usually a cause for celebration, or at least aggressive political maneuvering. But the tone was wrong. There was no joy in Zaira's voice. There was only grim determination. "Silence," the queen commanded. The murmur died instantly. "You know the rumors," Zaira said. "You have heard the whispers in the docking bays and the diplomatic lounges. You say that the Vulpine bloodline is cursed. You say that my daughter is a weapon that cannot be sheathed." She gestured to the drone hovering behind her. "Let us dispense with rumors. Let us look at the truth." The drone hummed to life. A beam of light shot upward, coalescing into a life-sized hologram, standing next to the Queen. Damon leaned forward, gripping the railing in front of him. The girl in the hologram was breathtaking and terrifying. She was clearly vulpine with the same fox-like ears and delicate features as her mother, but her fur was the color of a sunset, a shifting gradient of soft orange and gold. Her eyes were bright yellow, wide and luminous. But it was not her physical features that made Damon catch his breath. It was the air around her. Even in the hologram, the space around the princess seemed to distort. The light did not travel in straight lines. It bent, twisted, and shimmered. Her 9 tails, spectral glowing appendages made of pure energy, drifted behind her, like tendrils of smoke, phasing in and out of existence. Her skin seemed to sparkle as if constellations were flowing through her veins instead of blood. As the hologram stabilized, a low hum vibrated through the floor of the assembly hall. The lights in the massive chamber flickered. "This is Vixara," the Queen said. Damon felt a strange sensation in his head, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. He rubbed his temples. "What is that?" he muttered. "Is the ventilation system acting up?" "It is the Foxfire," Hale whispered, his face pale. "Even the recording carries a trace of it. Look at the readouts." Damon glanced at the ambassador's datapad. The biometric sensors were spiking. Heart rates across the hall were elevating. "My daughter possesses the gift of the ancients," Queen Zaira said. Her voice was softer now, laced with a mother's pain. "The Foxfire. It is a connection to the underlying fabric of the universe that is unfiltered. To be near her is to stand in the path of a raw, emotional gale. It bends reality. It distorts time. And for those whose minds are rigid, for those who cannot bend it, breaks them." The Queen looked out at the assembly, her expression hardening. "We have tried," she said. "Over the last 5 years we have entertained suitors from the greatest houses of the galaxy. The warrior poets of the Andromedan sector, the psychic scholars of the Theta Void, the industrial princes of the core worlds." She paused, and the silence stretched tight enough to snap. 53 suitors, Zaira said. 53 brave souls. And what became of them? She did not need to answer, but she did. 12 are currently in permanent cognitive therapy, unable to distinguish yesterday from tomorrow. 8 suffered total nervous collapse and can no longer speak. The rest fled. They ran from the room, clawing at the doors, begging to be let out of the presence of a young woman who simply wanted to say hello. Damon watched the hologram. Princess Vixara stood with her hands clasped in front of her. She looked down at the floor, her ears flattened against her skull. She looked ashamed. The stories Damon had heard in the pilot lounges suddenly made sense. He had heard about the madness of the fox. He had heard tales of a pilot who met a vulpine royal and spent the rest of his life screaming about colors that could talk. He had thought they were just spacer legends, the kind of things you told rookies to scare them out of their credits. "She has been in isolation for 3 years, Queen Zaira said. To protect you. To protect her. She lives in a shielded chamber cut off from all contact because her very existence is considered a biohazard." The Queen gripped the lectern until the metal groaned. "But a queen cannot rule alone, and a princess cannot inherit the throne without a consort to ground her power. The Foxfire requires a pair. It requires a balance. Without it, the power will eventually consume her, and she will burn out like a dying star." Zaira raised her chin. It was a challenge. It was a plea disguised as a command. "I ask this assembly now. Is there no one, is there not a single being among the trillions represented here who possesses the mental fortitude to stand beside my daughter? Is there no one who can look at her and see a wife rather than a monster?" The silence that followed was heavy and shameful. Damon looked around. He saw the Krill representative pretending to recalibrate his optical sensors. He saw the warrior species from the Outer Rim, 6-armed giants known for their bravery, suddenly finding the floor tiles incredibly interesting. He saw the elegant diplomats of the High Council, averting their gaze, checking their communicators, shuffling papers. They were terrified. They were calculating the risk-to-reward ratio, and finding it lacking. Why risk insanity for a political alliance? Why risk having your brain scrambled for a marriage contract? Ambassador Hale was trembling slightly. Tragic, he muttered, keeping his head down. Absolutely tragic. But it's impossible. No human mind could withstand a psionic field of that magnitude. We are too fragile. We would snap like dry twigs. Damon looked back at the hologram. The projection of Vixara lifted her head. For a second it seemed like she was looking directly at the camera, directly across the vast distance of the hall, and straight into the cheap seats where humanity sat. Her eyes were not glowing with malice. They were wet. She was crying, but she was trying to hide it. Damon knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror when he was 22, stuck on a derelict freighter with 3 hours of oxygen, left waiting to die alone in the dark. He had seen it on the faces of refugees he had transported out of war zones. People who had been told over and over that they were unwanted, that they were a burden, that they were dangerous. She wasn't a weapon. She was a kid who had been locked in a room because everyone was too cowardly to hold her hand. The unfairness of it hit Damon in the chest like a physical blow. He hated bullies. He hated the way the galaxy worked, where the weak were crushed and the strong were too busy protecting their own assets to help. But mostly he hated the look of absolute crushing loneliness on the face of that girl. 53 guys, Damon whispered. And not one of them stuck around just to talk. Damon, hush, Hale said. The Queen is concluding. She looks sad, Damon said, his voice rising slightly. She is dangerous, Hale corrected. She is a walking reality distortion event. Do not look at the eyes, Damon. It is a psychological trap. Damon ignored him. He watched the crowd. Thousands of powerful beings. Generals, admirals, kings. And they were all cowards. They were leaving her to rot in that chamber, because it was safer for them. Damon felt a familiar reckless itch start in his brain. It was the same feeling he got when he decided to fly through an asteroid field to cut 2 days off a shipping run. It was the feeling of calculating the odds, realizing they were terrible, and deciding to do it anyway, because the alternative was boring and safe and cowardly. He stood up. Damon, sit down, Hale hissed, grabbing at his jacket. What are you doing? Damon pulled his arm free. He took a step toward the railing of the balcony. He was just a cargo pilot. He wore a standard-issue flight suit that had been dry-cleaned for the occasion, but still looked utilitarian compared to the silks and armor around him. He had a scar on his chin from a bar fight on Mars, and a bank account that hovered constantly near zero. He was nobody. Hey! Damon shouted. His voice echoed in the silent hall. It was loud, unpolished, and distinctly human. Heads turned. Thousands of eyes shifted from the Queen to the small figure standing in the upper tier. Queen Zaira looked up. Her eyes narrowed, zooming in on him. Damon cleared his throat. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a bird trapped in a cage, but his hands were steady. He looked at the Queen, and then he looked at the hologram of the princess. I will do it, Damon said. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. This was a stunned, incredulous silence. I beg your pardon, Queen Zaira asked. Her tone was icy dangerous. Who speaks? Damon Reed, he said. Human delegation, Cargo Transport Division. A ripple of laughter went through the lower levels. A cargo pilot, a human. It was absurd. Damon gripped the railing tighter. You asked if anyone was brave enough, he called out, his voice cutting through the laughter. Or maybe you just asked if anyone was crazy enough. Either way, I am standing up, he pointed at the hologram. She looks lonely, Damon said simply. And I have got a high tolerance for turbulence. I have flown through ion storms in a tin can held together by duct tape and prayers. I can handle a little light show. Ambassador Hale looked like he was having a stroke. Damon, sit down. You are causing an incident. You are violating protocol. I am volunteering, Damon yelled back at Hale, then turned to the Queen. I will marry the Fox Princess. The laughter died down as the crowd realized he was serious. They looked at him with a mixture of pity and horror. He was signing his own death warrant. He was volunteering to be lobotomized by an alien princess. Queen Zaira stared at him for a long, agonizing minute. She seemed to be dissecting him with her gaze, peeling back the layers of his mind to see if he was mocking her. Then she looked at the hologram. Inside the isolation chamber miles away on the Vulpine flagship, the real Vixara was watching the feed. She saw the human standing there, scruffy, defiant, looking vastly out of place among the diplomats. He did not look like a prince. He looked like someone who knew how to fix an engine with a wrench. And he was looking at her, not with fear, not with greed. He was looking at her like she was a person. On the hologram, Vixara's ears perked up. A small, startled sound escaped her lips. It was a laugh, a soft, disbelief-filled laugh. He is loud, Vixara's voice came through the speakers, trembling slightly. Damon grinned. It was a crooked, tired grin. I have been told that, usually by traffic control. Queen Zaira looked from her daughter's image back to Damon. The exhaustion in her face lifted, replaced by a sharp, calculating interest. A human, she said, testing the word. A species known for short lifespans and irrational decision-making. We are also known for being stubborn, Damon added. The Queen slowly nodded. Very well, Damon Reed of Earth. You have stepped forward when the galaxy stepped back. She raised her hand. Bring him to the testing facility. Let us see if his mind is as durable as his mouth. Damon let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. He sat back down heavily. Ambassador Hale was staring at him with his mouth open. You just agreed to marry a biological weapon. Do you have any idea what the paperwork for this is going to look like? Damon shrugged, leaning back in his uncomfortable chair. Probably worse than a customs declaration form. He looked up at the hologram one last time. The princess was still watching him, her golden eyes wide, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. For the first time in hours, the boredom was gone. Well, Damon thought, checking his pulse. At least I won't have to listen to any more speeches about grain tariffs. He closed his eyes, listening to the chaos erupting around him, and smiled. He was probably going to die or go crazy or end up thinking he was a toaster. But for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he was actually flying. The transition from the Grand Assembly to the Administrative Processing Center of the Vulpine delegation was a blur of security checkpoints and medical scans. Damon was separated from Ambassador Hale immediately. Hale had been dragged off by a swarm of media drones, looking terrified and shouting something about diplomatic immunity and liability waivers. Damon, on the other hand, was escorted by 2 of the Vulpine Royal Guards. They were 7 feet tall, silent, and moved with a fluid grace that made Damon feel clumsy and heavy. They brought him to a holding room that looked less like a prison and more like a very expensive spa. The walls were a soft, calming beige. There was a fountain in the corner that defied gravity, the water flowing upward into a floating orb. Please wait here, Mr. Reed, one of the guards said. His voice was synthesized, coming from a speaker on his helmet. Dr. Syra will be with you shortly to assess your neural elasticity. Neural elasticity, Damon repeated. Is that a fancy way of seeing if my brain will melt? The guard did not answer. The door slid shut with a soft hiss. Damon walked over to the window. Station Unity was massive, a rotating wheel the size of a small moon. Outside, he could see the starfield, the endless black ocean he had spent his life traversing. He looked at his reflection in the transparisteel. He looked tired. He had bags under his eyes and his flight suit was wrinkled. What did you do, you idiot? He asked in his reflection. He thought about Vixara. He thought about the way the light bent around her. He thought about the 53 suitors who had broken. He was not special. He was not a psychic. He was not a warrior. He was just a guy who was good at keeping a ship steady when the inertial dampeners failed. But maybe that was exactly what she needed. Not someone to fight the storm, but someone who knew how to ride it out. The door opened behind him. A woman walked in. She was human, or at least mostly human. She wore a white medical coat and carried a datapad that seemed to be projecting a hologram of a human brain, presumably his. "Mr. Reed," she said, not looking up from the data. "I am Dr. Sarah, Chief Neurozoologist for the Alliance. I have been reviewing your medical files." "Good reading?" Damon asked, turning around. "Skip the part about the kidney stones in 28. That was a bad year." Dr. Sarah looked up. She had sharp features and glasses that reflected the data she was scrolling through. "You have logged 40,000 hours in hyperspace transit." "Give or take," Damon said. "That is excessive," the doctor said. "Most pilots retire after 20,000. The cumulative exposure to subspace radiation usually causes minor tremors or insomnia. You, however," she tapped the screen. "You show signs of chronic neural adaptation. Your brain has stopped trying to interpret hyperspace as a violation of physics and has simply accepted it as a background texture." She looked at him with clinical curiosity. "In layman's terms, Mr. Reed, you are already slightly unhinged. Your perception of reality is loose." Damon laughed. "I prefer the term flexible, Doctor." "We shall see," Dr. Sarah said. "The Foxfire is not hyperspace. It is a sentient emotion made manifest. It does not just warp space, it warps meaning. It takes your deepest fears and projects them onto the walls. It takes your memories and reshuffles them, like a deck of cards." She stepped closer, looking into his eyes with a small light pen. "Why did you volunteer?" she asked quietly. "The ambassador says you did it for attention. The media says you did it for the royal title." Damon pulled back slightly from the light. "I did it because she looked like she needed a friend," Damon said. "And because I was really bored with that speech about the beacons." Dr. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Then she clicked her pen off. "Interesting," she said. "A low-level survival instinct overridden by high-level empathy, masked by sarcasm. You are a fascinating chaos variable, Mr. Reed." She gestured to the door. "Come with me. The paperwork alone will take 3 hours. And then we have to see if you can survive being in the same room as her shadow." Damon followed her out. He felt a strange flutter in his stomach. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling of the engines spooling up the vibration of the deck plates right before the jump. He was going into the unknown. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just cargo. He was the pilot. "After you, Doctor," Damon said. "Let's go see the princess." The stack of digital documents hovering over the desk was thick enough that if printed on physical paper, it would have constituted a fire hazard. Damon Reed sat in a chair that was clearly designed for a species with a longer spine, staring at the glowing legal text scrolling past his eyes at a speed he could barely track. Ambassador Hale paced back and forth in the small administrative office, wringing his hands. The motion made the older man look like a nervous bird. "You are signing your life away," Hale said, his voice pitching up an octave. "Actually, it is worse than that. You are signing away your legal status as a sentient being in the Earth Coalition. Look at paragraph 4, section 9. It absolves the Alliance of any responsibility in the event of, and I quote, spontaneous molecular disassembly due to empathetic resonance overload." "Do you know what that means, Damon?" Damon tapped his thumb on the biometric scanner, authorizing another page without reading it. "I assume it means I might explode," Damon said. "Or maybe just melt. Like a chocolate bar left on a dashboard." "It is not a joke," Hale snapped. "You are treating a diplomatic crisis like a layover in a spaceport bar. This is a marriage contract to a biological singularity. Why are you signing so fast?" Damon paused his finger, hovering over the next "I agree" button. He looked up at Hale, his expression tired but amused. Because, Ambassador, if I actually read the fine print, I might realize this is a terrible idea, Damon said. And right now, I am operating on pure adrenaline and the memory of a really sad pair of eyes. Let me have my moment of stupidity. This is how humans show courage, Hale muttered, rubbing his temples. We sign things without reading them and hope for the best. Damon chuckled and pressed his thumb down again. A soft chime indicated that he had officially acknowledged the risk of temporal displacement. Another chime confirmed he understood that his memories might be remixed like a bad playlist. Done, Damon said, pushing the datapad away. I am now officially the fiancé of a woman I have met for exactly 30 seconds via hologram. When is the bachelor party? Hale did not smile. There is no party. There is only containment. The Vulpine delegation has prepared quarters for you in the diplomatic spire. It is adjacent to the isolation ward. Fancy, Damon said, standing up and stretching his back. Does it have a view? It has a view of the biosphere ring, Hale said. But do not get too comfortable. They are putting you there so they can monitor your brainwaves 24 hours a day. You are not a guest, Damon. You are a lab rat. The quarters were indeed fancy, but Hale was right about the lab rat feeling. The room was a sweeping arc of white polymer and gold accents, with a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the station's massive internal biosphere, a lush, artificial forest maintained under a dome of force fields. It was beautiful, but the silence in the room was absolute. There were cameras. Damon could not see them, but he felt them. He knew enough about surveillance from his smuggling days, back when he had to transport uncertified medical supplies past blockade sensors, to know when he was being watched. He threw his kit bag on the bed, which was large enough to sleep 4 people, and walked to the window. Down below, he could see tiny figures walking among the synthetic trees. Families, diplomats, people with normal lives who were not preparing to have their minds scrambled by an alien princess. The door chimed. It was a soft, polite sound, very different from the harsh buzzers on the cargo haulers. Come in, Damon said. The door slid open, revealing Dr. Sarah. She was still holding her datapad, and she looked even more severe than she had earlier. Behind her walked 2 Vulpine guards, who took up positions on either side of the door, their faces hidden behind ceramic masks. Mr. Reed, Dr. Sarah said, stepping into the room. Please sit down. We need to calibrate your baseline neural readings before the orientation. Damon sat on the edge of the bed. Is this where you tell me I have a tumor and disqualify me? On the contrary, Dr. Sarah said. She pulled a small humming device from her pocket and held it near Damon's forehead. A fan of blue light scanned his skull. I have been analyzing your flight logs and your medical history for the last 2 hours. It is illuminating. I told you, Damon said, staying very still as the light passed over his eyes. I fly cargo. It is boring work. It is boring work if you follow the safety regulations, Dr. Sarah corrected. You, however, have a habit of taking shortcuts through gravitational shear zones. You have logged over 300 jumps through the Theta sector, which is notorious for unstable warp tunnels. She lowered the device and looked at him, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Most pilots who fly those routes end up with the shakes or chronic migraines within 5 years, Dr. Sarah said. Their brains try to fight the distortion. They try to force the universe to make sense when it doesn't. That resistance causes damage. And me, Damon asked. You have 0 resistance, Dr. Sarah said. She tapped her screen, bringing up a 3D model of a brain that pulsated with soft colors. This is your brain, Mr. Reed. When you hit a gravity shear or a reality distortion, your neural pathways do not stiffen. They relax. You subconsciously accept the distortion. You let the universe bend, and you bend with it. She looked up at him with a mixture of professional admiration and personal confusion. It is a survival mechanism, she explained. A very rare one. You have spent 10 years letting your reality get warped just so you could deliver protein crates 3 days ahead of schedule. Your brain is not rigid. It is elastic. It is scar tissue built on top of scar tissue, but it is flexible. Damon shrugged. So I am crazy. Is that what you were saying? I am saying you are resilient, Dr. Sarah said. Dr. Hale thinks you will snap the moment you step into the princess's foxfire field. I am beginning to think you might just float. She put the device away. However, resilience is not immunity. The princess does not just bend gravity. She projects raw, unfiltered emotion, fear, grief, longing. It is a telepathic tsunami. If you let your guard down, if you try to analyze it or fight it, you will lose your sense of self. Great, Damon said. Don't think, just float. I can do that. We shall see, Dr. Sarah said. She turned to the door. Your cultural orientation officer is here. Pay attention, Mr. Reed. One wrong move with a Vulpine Royal, and the guards will vaporize you before you even have a chance to go insane. The orientation officer was a Vulpine elder named Kalen. He was old, his white fur thinning in patches, his back hunched under the weight of heavy ceremonial robes. But his eyes were sharp, and he carried a cane that looked like it could double as a weapon. For 2 hours, Damon sat in a chair, while Kalen lectured him on the intricacies of Vulpine etiquette. The tail is the center of balance, Kalen said, pacing around Damon. Not just physical balance, but spiritual. To touch a Vulpine's tail without invitation is an act of aggression. To step on it is a declaration of war. Don't step on the tails, Damon repeated. Got it. Eye contact, Kalen continued, stopping in front of Damon. Among your species, prolonged eye contact is a sign of honesty or aggression. Among the royal Vulpine, direct eye contact is an intimate exchange of dominance. If you stare at the princess, you are challenging her mental barriers. If she stares back, she is accepting the challenge. So look at her nose, Damon suggested. Look at her shoulder, Kalen corrected, until she invites you into her field. And never ever turn your back on her while the foxfire is active. The energy field responds to attention. If you look away, the field destabilizes. It interprets your dismissal as a vacuum and rushes in to fill it. You must maintain focus. Damon rubbed his face. So don't look at her too hard, but don't look away and don't touch the glowing tails. This sounds less like a marriage and more like bomb disposal. Kalen stopped pacing. He leaned on his cane and looked at Damon with a strange expression. It was not the disdain Damon had seen from the other diplomats. It was something closer to pity. You joke, Kalen said softly. You use humor as a shield. Many of the others did the same. The Prince of Andromeda made jokes about taming the beast. The Scholar of Theta thought he could solve her like an equation. Kalen leaned closer. Princess Vixara is not a puzzle human. She is a tragedy. She has spent her life watching people break because they tried to be strong. Do not try to be strong. Be water. Be windy. If you try to be a rock, the foxfire will grind you into dust. Damon stopped smiling. He looked at the old fox and nodded. I understand, Damon said. Good, Kalen said. Then it is time. She is waiting at the boundary. The isolation ward was a station within a station. It was a massive, heavily shielded section of the Vulpine flagship, which was currently docked with Station Unity. To get there, Damon had to pass through 3 airlocks and a decontamination field that made his skin tingle. When they finally reached the observation deck, Damon stopped. The hallway ahead ended in a wall of shimmering energy, a force field designed to contain the foxfire. But even through the field, he could feel it. It started as a pressure in his ears, like descending too fast in a shuttle. Then the light changed. The sterile white LEDs of the hallway seemed to deepen, shifting into amber and violet hues. The shadows of the guards standing by the door stretched out in the wrong direction, reaching toward the energy wall, instead of away from the light. Turbulence, Damon whispered to himself. He flexed his hands, feeling the familiar vibration in his fingertips. It felt exactly like the moment a ship's drive engaged that split second where physics decided to take a coffee break. I have flown in worse than this. He walked up to the barrier. On the other side was a large, sterile chamber. It was furnished with elegant vulpine furniture, low cushions, floating tables, but it felt empty. And there she was. Princess Vixara was sitting on a cushion in the center of the room. In person, she was even more striking than the hologram. Her fur was a vivid living orange that seemed to trap the light. She wore a simple white tunic, abandoning the heavy ceremonial robes from the broadcast. But the foxfire was wild. It swirled around her like invisible smoke. The air above her head rippled, as if rising from hot pavement. Her 9 spectral tails were visible now, glowing with a soft bioluminescent pulse. They drifted lazily through the air, passing through the furniture, as if it wasn't there. She looked up as Damon approached the glass. Her golden eyes locked onto him. For a second, the pressure in Damon's head spiked. He heard a sound that wasn't there, a high, crystalline chiming, like wind chimes in a storm. He felt a wave of sadness wash over him so intense that he almost took a step back. It wasn't his sadness. It was hers. He planted his feet. He took a breath, letting the emotion wash through him, rather than building a wall against it. Just turbulence, he thought. Ride the bump. The wave passed. He was still standing. Vixara tilted her head. Her ears twitched. She stood up and walked toward the barrier. Her movement was fluid, but the air around her dragged, creating visual trails, like a lagging video feed. She stopped a few feet from the force field. Up close, he could see the strain in her face. Being a living reality distortion engine looked exhausting. "You are human," she said. Her voice came through the comm system clear and melodic, but he could feel the resonance of it in his teeth. "Damon," he said. "Damon Reed. The human is just the packaging." Vixara's eyes narrowed slightly. Most suitors start sweating at this distance. The field leaks through the shielding. "You are not sweating." Damon shrugged, putting his hands in the pockets of his flight jacket. "I only sweat when I see invoices, Your Highness. Or when the coffee machine breaks. This is just a little atmospheric pressure." It was a lie, of course. His heart was hammering against his ribs at 120 beats per minute. But he kept his face relaxed. A corner of Vixara's mouth twitched upward. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Invoices," she repeated. "That is a mundane fear." "I am a mundane guy," Damon said. "I haul cargo. I pay taxes. I try to avoid asteroids. Simple life." "Simple," Vixara echoed. She looked down at her hands, which were glowing faintly. "I do not know what simple feels like. I have never been in a room where the walls stayed straight." She looked back up at him. "Do you know what happened to the last one? The Archduke of Krell." "I heard he had to go to therapy," Damon said. "He tried to fight the field," Vixara said, her voice turning bitter. "He was a warrior. He thought my presence was an enemy to be defeated. He stood there, flexing his mind, trying to force the room to be still. He tried to dominate the chaos." She stepped closer to the glass, her spectral tails lashing behind her. "The chaos does not like to be dominated, Damon Reed. It shattered him. He fell to the floor screaming that the floor was eating him. He was a hero of 5 wars and he broke in 3 minutes." Damon looked at her. He didn't see a monster. He saw a girl who was terrified of her own strength. "That sounds exhausting," Damon said. "Trying to force the world to be straight when it wants to be curvy. I don't do that." "What do you do?" Vixara asked. "I drift," Damon said. "When the gravity waves hit my ship, I cut the engines and let the hull slide. If you fight the wave, the hull cracks. If you ride it, you just get a little motion sick, but you come out the other side." He tapped the glass with his knuckle. "I am not here to fight you, Princess. And I am definitely not here to conquer anything. I am just here to hang out. If the walls want to melt, let them melt. I have seen uglier walls. Vixara stared at him. The swirling energy around her seemed to slow down. The visual distortion calmed, settling into a gentle shimmer. No one has ever come here just to hang out, she said, testing the phrase as if it were a foreign word. They all want the alliance, or the power, or the glory of taming the fox princess. Glory is overrated, Damon said. And I don't care about politics. Honestly, I just didn't want you to be alone in here. Vixara looked stunned. She opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. Her tails lowered, wrapping around her legs like a protective barrier. You are a strange human, Damon Reed, she whispered. I get that a lot, Damon said. So, are we going to stare at each other through the glass all day? Or do I get to see if the air in there tastes like purple? Vixara actually laughed then. It was a short, sharp sound. It tastes like ozone and static, she corrected. But you can try it tomorrow, if you are still brave enough. I'll be here, Damon promised. I have nowhere else to go. Ambassador Hale confiscated my passport. That night, sleep did not come easily for Damon. The bed was too soft, the room was too quiet, and his brain was buzzing with the residual energy of the encounter. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw gold. When he finally drifted off, it wasn't a normal sleep. It was a heavy sinking sensation like falling through thick water. He found himself standing in a forest. But it wasn't a biosphere forest. The trees here were made of glass, and the leaves were floating embers. The sky was a swirling vortex of violet and indigo moving like oil on water. In the center of the clearing sat Vixara. She was sitting on a branch of a glowing tree, her tails hanging down like willow branches. She looked down at him. In the dream, she wasn't terrifying. She was luminous. You are sleeping, she said. Her voice didn't come from her mouth. It echoed directly in his skull. This is a weird dream, Damon said, looking at his hands. They were translucent. Are you doing this, or did I eat some bad synthesized cheese? The foxfire leaks, Vixara said sadly. Even through the shielding. When I think about someone, the field reaches out. It connects. I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude on your rest. Damon walked over to the tree. He leaned against the trunk. It felt warm like sun-baked stone. It's okay, Damon said. It beats my usual nightmares. Usually I dream about engine failure or tax audits. Vixara jumped down from the branch. She landed silently. In the dream space, the distortion was gone. Everything was sharp, clear, and incredibly intense. Why didn't you run? She asked. The question was raw, stripped of the royal haughtiness she wore in the waking world. When the light bent. When you felt the pressure. Why didn't you turn around? Damon looked at her. He saw the hesitation in her posture. She was waiting for him to lie. Because I was scared, Damon admitted. Vixara blinked. You were terrified, Damon said. My knees were shaking. But I looked at you standing there in that box with everyone treating you like a bomb, and you looked lonelier than I felt scared. He reached out his hand, passing through a floating ember. I have spent 10 years in a cockpit, Vixara. I know what it is like to talk to yourself just to hear a voice. I know what it is like to watch the galaxy go by through a window and feel like you are not part of it. I saw that in your eyes. Vixara stared at him. Tears formed in her golden eyes, but they didn't fall. They turned into tiny motes of light and floated away. It is loud, she whispered. The loneliness. It is the loudest thing in the room. Yeah, Damon said. It is. But it is quieter when there are two people. He offered her a smile. I'm not going anywhere, Vixara. Let the reality bend. I can handle a little wobble. For the first time, Vixara reached out. She hesitated, then brushed her fingertips against his arm. In the dream, her touch didn't hurt. It felt like a static shock, sharp but energizing. Thank you, she said. The world dissolved into white light. Damon woke up gasping. He sat up in bed, his sheets soaked in sweat. The room was bright with the morning artificial sunlight of Station Unity. He looked at his arm. There was no mark, but the skin where she had touched him in the dream was tingling a persistent warmth that wouldn't fade. He wasn't crazy. Or maybe he was. But the connection was real. It wasn't just biology or physics. It was something else. The door chime interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," Damon croaked. He grabbed a glass of water from the bedside table. Ambassador Hale walked in, looking even more frazzled than the day before. Behind him came Queen Zaira herself. Damon scrambled to stand up, nearly tripping over his boots. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing awkwardly in his sleep shorts. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Queen Zaira swept into the room. She looked at Damon with an intensity that made him want to hide under the bed. "The medical reports are unexpected," the Queen said, skipping the pleasantries. "Dr. Syra says your neural resilience is off the charts, and the guards reported that the interaction at the boundary yesterday was stable." She stepped closer, towering over him. "And last night," she said softly. "My daughter slept through the night for the first time in 3 years. Usually her sleep is a tempest of nightmares that shakes the ship. Last night the sensors were calm." Damon rubbed his arm, where the phantom touch still lingered. "We had a chat," he said. "A chat," Zaira repeated. She looked at Hale. "He calls a telepathic communion a chat." Hale wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "He is very colloquial, Your Majesty." "It is promising," Queen Zaira said. She turned back to Damon. "Which is why we are moving the timeline up." "Moving it up?" Damon asked. "I thought I had a week of orientation." "We do not have a week," Zaira said. "The Grand Assembly is growing restless. The longer we wait, the more time the political factions have to sabotage this union. And the more time you have to lose your nerve." She fixed him with a hard stare. "The covenant ceremony will take place in 2 days. You will enter the chamber without shielding, and you will initiate the bond. If you survive, you will be the consort. If you do not, we will give you a hero's funeral." "2 days," Hale squeaked. "Your Majesty, that is suicide. He needs months of conditioning." "He has 10 years of conditioning," Zaira said, dismissing Hale with a wave of her hand. She looked at Damon. "Do you object, human?" Damon looked at the Queen. He thought about the dream. He thought about the girl on the branch made of light. 2 days is fine," Damon said. "I pack light." Hale looked like he was about to faint. "Damon, listen to me. This is not a game. You are going to walk into a psychic reactor core. You could lose your mind. You could forget who you are." Damon walked to the window. He looked down at the fake forest, at the safe, boring lives of the people below. He could back out. He could go back to his ship, back to the lonely void, back to the silence. "At least it is not another trade meeting," Damon said quietly. He turned back to the Queen and the ambassador. "I'll do it. But I have one condition." "You are in no position to make demands," Zaira growled. "I want her to choose the snacks for the reception," Damon said, grinning. "If I am going to risk my brain, I want to make sure the food is good." Queen Zaira stared at him for a long second, and then a low, rumbling sound came from her throat. It took Damon a moment to realize she was chuckling. "Very well, Damon Reed," she said. 2 days. She turned and left the room, her robes swirling behind her. Hale remained staring at Damon with tragic eyes. "I will prepare the liability waivers," he whispered, and shuffled out. Damon was left alone in the silence. He walked back to the window and looked toward the section of the station where the Vulpine ship was docked. Somewhere over there, behind layers of shielding and fear, Vixara was waiting. His hands were shaking slightly. He held them up and watched the tremors. "Okay," Damon whispered to the empty room. "I'm scared." He clenched his fists, forcing them to steady. "But I'm not lonely," he added. And for the first time in his life, The fear didn't feel like a warning to stop. It felt like the engine was rumbling before takeoff. It felt like he was finally actually going somewhere. The entrance to the princess's inner sanctum was not so much a door as it was a warning sign written in the language of architecture. It stood at the end of a long, sterile corridor in the isolation ward, a massive slab of dark metallic stone, etched with patterns that seemed to crawl across the surface if one looked at them for too long. Damon Reed stood before it, adjusting the collar of his flight jacket. He felt ridiculous. He was about to walk into a reality distortion field, armed with nothing but a sarcasm reflex and a good night's sleep. Kalen, the Vulpine advisor, stood beside him. The old fox leaned heavily on his cane, his ears flattened against his skull. He looked at Damon with an expression that was 1 part pity and 2 parts preparation for a funeral. "Beyond this threshold," Kalen said, his voice grave, "the laws of physics are suggestions. The foxfire inside is not dampened by the shielding. It is raw. It is the subconscious mind of the princess, projected onto the material world." "So, if she is in a bad mood, the floor turns to lava?" Damon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "If she is in a bad mood, the floor ceases to exist as a concept," Kalen corrected. "Listen to me, human. Your mind is a vessel. The foxfire is the ocean. If you try to hold the ocean back, the vessel will crack. If you feel your sense of self dissolving, if you forget your name or why you are here, you must retreat immediately. The emergency extractors will pull you out, but by then the damage may be permanent." Damon looked at the door. "My name is Damon Reed. I fly cargo. I hate synthetic coffee. I am here because the girl inside is lonely." He looked at Kalen. "I think I have got the basics covered." Kalen sighed a long, rattling sound. "May the stars hold you together, Damon Reed." The advisor tapped a sequence into the wall panel. The heavy stone slab did not slide open. It dissolved, turning into a mist of gray particles that swirled away. Damon took a deep breath. It smelled of ozone-burnt sugar and the metallic tang of blood, though he was fairly certain the blood smell was a hallucination. "Here goes nothing," he whispered, and stepped through. The first thing that hit him was the nausea. It wasn't a stomachache. It was a profound bone-deep sickness that felt exactly like a gravitational drive malfunction. It was the feeling of his inner ear telling him he was falling, his eyes telling him he was standing still, and his proprioception telling him he was upside down. Damon stumbled his hand instinctively, reaching out to steady himself against the wall. His hand went through the wall. It felt like dipping his fingers into cold gelatin. He jerked his hand back, staring at the gray surface. It rippled, then solidified again. "Okay," Damon muttered, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. "Walls are liquid. Good to know." He looked down the hallway leading to the central chamber. It was wrong. The geometry was offensive. The hallway appeared to be simultaneously 10 feet long and 10 miles long. The floor tiles were hexagonal, but as he watched they shifted into circles, then into shapes that had too many angles to exist in three-dimensional space. He took a step. His foot landed, but the sound of his boot heel hitting the floor echoed a full second later. Clack. He took another step. Clack. He was walking through a time delay. Just turbulence, Damon told himself, reciting the mantra he used when his ship shook violently enough to rattle his teeth. Just bad weather. Keep flying the heading. He forced himself to walk forward. The air grew thicker with every meter. It wasn't just air anymore. It was an atmosphere of heavy, suffocating emotion. It pressed against his skin like a physical weight. Sorrow. It washed over him in a cold gray wave. It wasn't his sorrow. He felt a sudden crushing grief for a toy he had never owned, for a mother he had never lost, for a sky he had never seen. It was Vixara's grief, leaking out of her mind and staining the reality around her. Then came the fear. It was sharp and jagged. It felt like being hunted. It felt like hundreds of eyes watching him, judging him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Damon gritted his teeth. He recognized this feeling. It was the way he felt every time he walked into a high society function, the way he felt sitting in the Grand Assembly, the feeling of being small, unworthy and out of place. "Get out of my head," he grunted, shaking his head as if to clear water from his ears. "I have enough of my own baggage. I don't need to carry yours too." He pushed forward. The hallway seemed to twist the ceiling, dipping low enough to graze his hair before snapping back up to cathedral heights. Shadows stretched out from objects that weren't there. A chair sitting by the wall melted into a puddle of wood, and fabric then reformed as a birdcage, then back to a chair. He focused on the door at the end of the hall. It was the only thing that seemed stable. He locked his eyes on it, ignoring the way his peripheral vision swarmed with impossible colors, shades of neon brown and hyperviolet that hurt his optic nerves. He reached the end of the hall. He didn't bother knocking. He suspected the door wouldn't hear him anyway. He stepped into the main chamber. The center of the storm was surprisingly quiet, but visually catastrophic. It was a large room, or at least it tried to be. The far wall was made of transparasteel, offering a view of the stars, but the stars were streaking, as if the station were moving at light speed, even though Damon knew they were stationary. Furniture hovered a few inches off the floor. Books fluttered through the air like confused birds. And in the middle of it all stood Vixara. She was not wearing the royal robes of the assembly, nor the simple tunic from the day before. She wore a dress that seemed to be woven from smoke and starlight shifting opacity with her mood. The foxfire was intense here. It wasn't just a glow. It was a roaring bonfire of psychic energy. Her 9 spectral tails lashed out behind her, cutting through the air, leaving trails of glowing embers that slowly faded. She turned to face him. Her golden eyes were wide, the pupils slit like a predator's. But beneath the power, Damon saw the exhaustion. She looked like someone holding up a collapsing ceiling with her bare hands. "You came in," she said. Her voice didn't echo. It sounded flat, absorbed by the chaos. "I said I would," Damon replied. He had to shout slightly to be heard over the low, thrumming vibration of the room. "Nice place. Very avant-garde. Who is your decorator? Salvador Dali?" Vixara didn't smile. The air around her crackled. A vase on a nearby table exploded silently, turning into a cloud of dust. "You should not be here," she said. "The field is unstable today. I woke up anxious and the room responded." "I noticed," Damon said. He took a few steps closer. The floor felt spongy, like walking on moss. "The hallway tried to eat my hand, and I am pretty sure I saw a lamp turn into a badger." "It is not funny, Damon," Vixara snapped. The sudden flare of her irritation sent a shockwave through the room. The gravity shifted. Damon felt his stomach drop as the floor tilted 45 degrees to the left. He grabbed onto a floating table to keep from sliding. "Whoa," Damon said, hanging on. "Easy on the temper. Gravity is a privilege, not a right." Vixara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The floor slowly leveled out. "See," she said, her voice trembling. "I cannot control it. Every emotion I feel becomes physics. If I get angry, you get crushed. If I get sad, you drown. Why would you walk into this?" Damon let go of the table. He dusted off his hands. "Because dating in a hazard zone keeps things interesting," he said. "Keeps you on your toes. Besides, I told you I have a high tolerance for bad weather." "This is not weather," Vixara shouted. The force of her shout blew the windows outward, not breaking them, but bowing the glass as if it were rubber. The light in the room shifted from gold to a bruised purple. "This is my mind," she cried, gesturing to the swirling chaos. "This is what I live with every second. It never stops. It never settles. And you are just a human. You are fragile. You break." She looked at him with a desperate intensity. The Prince of Andromeda was a super soldier. He broke. The Scholar of Theta had a mind enhanced by computers. He broke. You haul cargo. You are soft. Damon looked at the chaos swirling around her. She was trying to scare him. She was trying to push him away before he could get hurt, before she could add another casualty to her conscience. He took another step. He was only 5 feet away from her now. The air was hot, singing with static. The hair on his arm stood up. "I am soft," Damon agreed. "I am squishy. I bleed if you poke me. I am definitely not a super soldier." He stopped. He looked her directly in the eyes, ignoring the warning from Kaelin. "But here is the thing about soft things, Vixara. They don't shatter. They bend." He held out his hand. It was a simple gesture, a handshake, an offering. Vixara stared at his open palm, as if it were a grenade. "You do not understand," she whispered. "Touching me, it bridges the gap. The foxfire won't just be around you. It will be in you. It has broken stronger minds than yours." "Maybe they were too strong," Damon said gently. "Maybe they were so rigid they couldn't flex." He kept his hand out. "Come on. Let's see if I explode." Vixara hesitated. Her tails writhed behind her, reflecting her internal conflict. She wanted to take his hand. He could see it in the way she leaned forward, drawn to the promise of connection, like a moth to a flame. But she was terrified of destroying him. "If you let go," she warned. "If you pull away when it starts, the backlash will scramble your frontal lobe. You have to hold on." "I have a hell of a grip," Damon said. "Climber's fingers." Vixara looked at his face one last time, searching for fear. She found it, but she also found a stubborn, stupid kind of determination. She reached out. Her hand was trembling. Her skin glowed with that faint constellations under the surface light. Their fingers brushed. Static. A sharp pop of electricity. Then she grabbed his hand. The world didn't end. It just dissolved. Damon didn't feel pain. He felt everything else. It was as if someone had taken the concept of Damon Reed and put it into a centrifuge. His vision went white, then black, then exploded into a kaleidoscope of memories that weren't his. He was running through a field of crystal grass, laughing, chasing a butterfly made of light. He was 5 years old. He was happy. He was sitting in a dark room, knees pulled to his chest, listening to voices outside the door talking about containment protocols. He was 10. He was terrified. He was watching a young man walk out of the room screaming, clawing at his eyes. He felt the crushing guilt, the conviction that he was a monster. The emotions hit him like a physical blow, a sledgehammer to the chest. Loneliness so vast it felt like drowning in deep space. Fear so sharp it felt like being flayed. And then his own memories rose up to meet them. The smell of recycled air on a dying freighter. The silence of the cockpit on a 3-week haul. The feeling of being invisible in a room full of people. The two streams of consciousness slammed into each other. The reality of the room vanished. Damon wasn't standing on the floor anymore. He was floating in a void of screaming color. Up was down. Time was purple. A second lasted for 1,000 years. He felt his ego starting to fray. Who am I? The question wasn't words. It was a sensation. He felt the edges of his identity peeling away. The foxfire was too strong. It was washing him away, dissolving the boundaries between him and Vixara. He was becoming her. He was becoming the storm. Panic flared. Fight it. His instincts screamed. Push back. Build a wall. Assert your reality. That was what the prince had done. That was what the scholar had done. They had tried to be rocks in the river. Damon felt the mental strain, the headache that threatened to split his skull. If he fought this, he would snap. The force was too great. "Don't fight," a voice in his head whispered. It was his pilot's voice, the voice that took over when the engines failed. Turbulence, he thought. It is just turbulence. Relax the controls. Let the ship drift. Damon stopped fighting. He stopped trying to insist that the floor was flat. He stopped trying to insist that he was Damon Reed, a separate entity. He let the chaos in. He let the grief wash through him. He didn't block it. He let it flow over him like water, acknowledging it, feeling it, and then letting it pass downstream. Okay, he thought. We are sad. That is fine. We are scared. That is allowed. He surrendered to the distortion. He felt himself stretching, pulling, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. He was a long ribbon of consciousness spanning a galaxy. He was a single point of light. But in the center of the hurricane he held onto one thing. The hand. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. A physical anchor in the metaphysical storm. He focused all of his remaining willpower on the sensation of Vixara's fingers, interlaced with his. Grip, he told himself. Just grip. He felt Vixara's panic. She could feel him dissolving. She tried to let go, to save him, to push him away, before he was erased. No, Damon thought, tightening his hold. I am not leaving. He projected that thought through the connection. It wasn't a thought of strength or dominance. It was a thought of presence. I am here. It is messy, and it is loud, and nothing makes sense, but I am here. He visualized his ship riding a gravity wave. He visualized the hull groaning, the rivets popping, but the structure holding. He wrapped that visualization around the two of them. We drift together. The chaotic storm around them didn't stop, but it changed. The screaming noise harmonized. The violent, jagged spikes of fear smoothed out into long, rolling swells of emotion. Damon opened his eyes. Or at least he thought he opened them. He was back in the room. But the room was still wrong. The walls were breathing in and out. The colors were too bright. Gravity was pulling him sideways. But he was standing, and he was holding Vixara's hand. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. The foxfire around her was going wild, pulsing in time with her racing heart, but it wasn't attacking him anymore. It was flowing around him. He was the rock in the stream that the water had learned to flow over. Sweat was pouring down Damon's face. His nose was bleeding, a drop of bright red, falling onto the shifting floor. His knees were shaking so hard, he thought he might collapse. But he didn't let go. Vixara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She looked terrified, but also awestruck. "You," she stammered. "You are still here." Damon gasped for air. His lungs felt like they had been filled with helium. "Yeah," he wheezed. "I am still here." He squeezed her hand. It was a weak squeeze, but it was there. That was... Damon paused, trying to find the words, while his brain slowly reassembled itself from the scattered puzzle pieces. That was easily at the top of my worst turbulence list. Beat the Theta run of 24 by a mile. Vixara stared at him. The sheer absurdity of the statement seemed to short-circuit her panic. "You are comparing a psychic melding of souls to bad weather?" she asked incredulously. "Hey," Damon said, wiping the blood from his nose with his free hand. "Bad weather can kill you just as dead. But you know the trick." "What is the trick?" she whispered. "You don't fight the wind," Damon said. "You adjust the sails." He looked around the room. The walls were still warping, but slower now. The furniture had stopped exploding. The storm was still there, but it wasn't a disaster anymore. It was just an environment. A high-energy, chaotic environment, but one that could be survived. Vixara let out a sound. It started as a sob, but turned into a laugh. It was a hysterical, relieved, beautiful sound. And as she laughed, the foxfire reacted. The harsh, jagged light softened. The purple and gray hues melted into a warm sunset orange. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, replaced by a feeling that was almost buoyant. The room stopped spinning and settled into a gentle, rhythmic rocking, like a boat on a calm sea. "You are insane," Vixara said, a tear tracking through the fur on her cheek. "You are absolutely, completely defective." "That is what the doctor said," Damon grinned, though his head was pounding. "She called it neural elasticity. I call it being too stubborn to break." He realized he was still holding her hand. He realized he didn't want to let go. For 10 years, he had touched control panels, cargo crates, and cold metal. He hadn't touched anything alive that made him feel like this. Like he was real. "So," Damon said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Is the test over, or do I have to dodge a fireball next?" Vixara looked at him. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by something new. Something that looked dangerously like hope. "The test is over," she said softly. "You passed Damon Reed." She squeezed his hand back. Her skin was warm. "But you are bleeding on my floor." Damon looked down at the drop of blood. "Sorry. I'll clean that up. Unless the floor decides to clean itself." "It might," Vixara said. "It is having a good day." They stood there for a long moment, two solid points in a fluid world, anchored to each other. The foxfire swirled around them, no longer a cage, but a cocoon. Damon took a deep breath, tasting the ozone and the strange, spicy scent of the foxfire. He felt exhausted, battered, and his brain felt like it had been put through a blender. He had never felt better. The silence that followed the handshake was not empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the aftershocks of a psychic earthquake. Damon Reed stood in the center of the chamber, his boots planted on a floor that was currently rippling like a disturbed pond. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving with the effort of simply existing. His head felt light, detached, as if his brain were a helium balloon tethered to his neck by a fraying string. But he was standing. And more importantly, he knew his name. "Damon," he whispered, testing the word. It tasted like copper and ozone. "Damon Reed, pilot, humans, fan of dark roast coffee." "Okay, we are still here." Outside the containment field, the medical monitors were likely screaming. Dr. Syra was probably tearing her hair out, staring at readouts that defied every textbook on xenoneurology she had ever read. By all accounts, Damon should have been on the floor, curled into a fetal ball, babbling about the color of time. Instead, he was checking his pulse. 110, he muttered. "Not bad, considering I just mind-melded with a supernova." Vixara was watching him. She had taken a half-step back, her arms wrapped around herself. The foxfire around her had retracted, pulling close to her body like a protective cloak. It was no longer a storm. It was a simmering glow, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic beat that matched her breathing. "You are shaking," she said. Her voice was quiet, lacking the royal projection she used in the assembly. It was just a girl's voice now. "Adrenaline crash," Damon said. He tried to smile, but his face felt numb. "It happens after a bad jump. Give me 5 minutes and a protein bar and I will be fine." "You should sit," Vixara said. She gestured to a chair that was currently hovering 3 feet off the ground and rotating slowly. "Or float. I am sorry about the furniture. It gets confusing when I am emotional." Damon looked at the chair. "I think I will walk. My legs need to remember how to work." Vixara hesitated, then nodded. She turned toward a hallway that twisted away from the main chamber, disappearing into a haze of soft violet light. "Walk with me," she said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a ritual. It was just a request. Damon followed her. The interior of the princess's isolation chamber was not just a room. It was a geography of the mind. As they walked away from the central space, the architecture became less aggressive and more melancholic. The corridor they entered was long and curved, but the curve didn't make geometric sense. It felt like walking on the inside of a seashell. The walls were made of a substance that looked like polished marble, but every few seconds, images would drift across the surface. Shadowy figures, fleeting memories, echoes of things that had happened hours or years ago. "This is my house," Vixara said softly, running her hand along the wall. The stone rippled under her fingers like water. "It is not much, but it has excellent security." "It has character," Damon said. He watched a potted plant on a side table slowly bloom, wither, and bloom again in the span of 10 seconds. Most apartments on the station just have beige walls and a smell of recycled air. This place has a good mood. It is a cage, Vixara corrected him, though there was no anger in her voice, only a tired acceptance. A cage made of light and expensive shielding, but a cage nonetheless. She stopped by a large ornate mirror. The reflection didn't show Damon and Vixara standing there. Instead, it showed an empty hallway perfectly straight, with normal gravity. That is what the room looked like yesterday, Vixara explained, noticing his stare. The mirrors have a delay. They cannot keep up with the changes, so they show the past. It is the only place I can look to see things standing still. Damon stepped in front of the mirror. He watched as his own reflection slowly walked into the frame 10 seconds late. It was disorienting, a visual reminder that time in here was fluid. So, Damon said, tearing his eyes away from the lagging reflection. You grew up here in this fun house. No, Vixara said. She resumed, walking, her spectral tails trailing behind her like luminous smoke. I was born on the homeworld, in the Summer Palace. Her voice took on a wistful quality, and as she spoke, the foxfire around her shifted color, turning a soft, grassy green. The air in the corridor suddenly smelled of rain and damp earth. I was normal, she said, or as normal as a royal can be. I had a garden. I had tutors. I had friends. Damon walked beside her, careful not to step on the trailing light of her tails. Friends. A few, Vixara said. Other children of the court. We used to play hide and seek in the hedge maze. I was good at it because I was small and fast. She paused, looking at a painting on the wall that was slowly dripping paint onto the floor. I remember the day it changed. I was 12. We were playing. I tripped and scraped my knee. It hurt. It was a sharp, sudden pain. The green light in the corridor spiked, turning a jagged red for a split second before settling back. Damon felt a phantom sting on his own knee, a sympathetic echo. I cried out, Vixara continued, and when I did, the hedge maze reacted. The bushes turned to thorns. The ground shook. The sky above us turned purple. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. My friends, they didn't help me. They screamed. They looked at me, and then they looked at the sky and they ran. They ran so fast. One of them, a boy named Kale, left his shoe behind in the mud. He didn't even stop to get it. Damon listened, watching her profile. He didn't interrupt with, I'm sure they didn't mean it, or, kids are scared easily. He knew those were empty words. Do you remember Kale? Damon asked instead. Vixara looked at him surprised. Yes, he was the son of the Minister of Defense. Did you ever give him his shoe back? Vixara blinked. A small, sad smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. No. The guards took me away before I could. They put me in a suppression room. They told me I was dangerous. They told me my emotions were too loud for the world. That is a heavy thing to tell a 12-year-old, Damon said. That feeling sad breaks the world. It was the truth, Vixara whispered. From that day on, every time I felt something strong, things broke. Glass shattered. Electronics failed. People changed. She stopped walking. They had reached a large circular room at the end of the corridor. It was a solarium of sorts with a massive viewport that looked out into the void of space. But the view was wrong. Because of the foxfire field, the starlight was refracted. The stars weren't points of light. They were streaks, long ribbons of color painting the black canvas. It looked like a Van Gogh painting coming to life, swirling and chaotic. Vixara walked to the window and pressed her hand against the transparent steel. 53, she said. Damon stood a few feet behind her. The suitors. 53 men, Vixara said. Princes, generals, genius scholars. They all came through that door. They all wore armor, either physical or mental. She turned to face Damon. The light from the distorted stars silhouetted her, making her look like a spirit made of glass. "The Prince of Andromeda," she said. "He brought a shield generator. He thought he could block the frequency. When the generator failed, he tried to fight the field with his will. He shouted at me. He commanded the room to be still." Vixara looked down at her hands. The room did not listen. He broke. He started weeping about a battle he had lost 10 years ago. He couldn't stop. "He brought a fight," Damon said quietly. "And the room gave him a war." "The scholar," Vixara went on. "He tried to analyze me. He had sensors attached to his head. He treated me like a broken hyperdrive engine. He kept asking me to modulate my output. When he realized he couldn't solve me, he panicked. He lost his ability to do math. He forgot how to count to 10. She looked at Damon, her eyes wet. "They all brought something," she said. "Ambition, pride, greed, curiosity. And the Foxfire took it, amplified it, and crushed them with it. And then they left. And I stayed here." She gestured to the empty, beautiful, terrifying room. "I am the common denominator, Damon. I am the reason they broke. I am the curse." Damon looked at her. He looked at the tears tracking through the golden fur on her cheeks. He looked at the spectral tails that were drooping low, touching the floor, in a posture of defeat. He walked past her and stood next to her at the window. He looked out at the streaked stars. "You know," Damon said conversationally, "when you fly cargo, you spend a lot of time in the dark. Just you and the ship and the void. You start to think weird thoughts. You start to worry that maybe you don't exist, that maybe the universe is just a dream you are having." He turned his head to look at her. "I have seen guys crack out there. Good pilots. They get something called void sickness. They start screaming because the silence is too loud." Vixara watched him, listening intently. "Is it the void's fault?" Damon asked. "Is emptiness a curse?" "No," Vixara said. "It is just space." "Exactly," Damon said. He turned his body fully toward her. "You are not a curse, Vixara. You are just a lot. You are high gravity. You are loud. You are intense." He pointed a finger at her chest, not touching, just indicating. "Those guys, the Prince, the Scholar. They didn't break because of you. They broke because they were brittle. They walked in here wrapped in their own egos, their own fears, their own expectations. They brought their own cracks with them." Vixara's breath hitched. The Foxfire flared, illuminating the room in a wash of sudden brilliant gold. "You are not the monster in the dungeon," Damon said, his voice firm. "You are just the one who got locked in with everyone else's fear. They projected their terror onto you, and you, being a literal psychic mirror, reflected it right back at them." Vixara stared at him. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The realization hit her like a physical wave. For 3 years, she had been told she was the weapon, the hazard, the thing that hurt people. "They broke on what they brought in," Damon repeated. "You just made it louder." Vixara let out a sob. It was a raw, jagged sound. The room reacted instantly. The floor beneath them shuddered. The walls groaned. A low hum vibrated through the air. But Damon didn't flinch. He didn't back away. He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at her, like she was just a person having a bad day, not a nuclear reactor having a meltdown. "It is okay," he said softly. "Let it out. I am waterproof." Vixara sank to the floor. She didn't fall. She just folded, sitting on the invisible cushion of the Foxfire. She buried her face in her hands and cried. It wasn't the polite, silent crying of a princess. It was the messy, heaving crying of a girl who had been holding her breath for 1,000 days. As she cried, the room wept with her. Condensation formed on the walls and ran down in rivets. The light turned a deep, melancholy blue. The air grew cold. Damon sat down next to her. He didn't try to hug her. He knew that might be too much sensory input, but he sat close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He sat with her in the blue cold. He sat with her while the room shook with her grief. After a long time, The sobbing subsided into sniffles. Vixara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Damon sideways. "You are still here," she said, her voice hoarse. "Still here," Damon confirmed. "Though my butt is getting numb. This floor is cold." Vixara let out a wet chuckle. She snapped her fingers, and the floor beneath them warmed up. The texture changed from hard metal to something resembling soft grass. "Better?" she asked. "Much," Damon said. "See useful powers." They sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the distorted stars. "Tell me about the gravity jump," Vixara said suddenly. "You mentioned it in the dream. The accident." Damon leaned back on his hands. He looked up at the ceiling, which was currently displaying a shifting pattern of clouds. "It was 6 years ago," Damon said. "I was flying a courier ship, the Red Horizon. Fast ship, thin hull. I was trying to beat a deadline to the Proxima sector. I cut through a gravity shear, a place where 2 black holes were dancing a little too close." He paused, remembering the feeling. The screaming of the metal, the taste of blood. "The drive failed mid-jump. We didn't explode. We just stopped. We were stuck in the fold between spaces. For 3 days we weren't in the universe. We were nowhere." "What did it feel like?" Vixara asked. "Like being unmade," Damon said. "I looked at my hand and I could see through it. I looked at the console and the numbers were running backward. My co-pilot didn't make it. His mind couldn't handle the abstraction. He opened the airlock and walked out into nothing." Vixara gasped softly. She reached out and touched Damon's arm. Her touch was hesitant, gentle. "I stayed in the chair," Damon said. "I just sat there. I brewed a pot of coffee. I drank it while my cup kept turning into a flower pot. I decided that if I was going to die, I was going to die doing my job. I rebooted the drive. Manually. One switch at a time." He looked at Vixara. "When I finally popped back into real space, I was different. The doctors said I was fine, but I knew. I never quite landed. Part of me is still out there in the fold. Part of me is still sliding sideways." He tapped his temple. "That is why I didn't break when I touched you, Vixara. I am already broken in the same place as you are. I know what it is like to not fit in the straight lines." Vixara looked at him with a profound sense of recognition. It wasn't the look of a royal to a subject. It was the look of a castaway, finding another survivor on a deserted island. "We are both stuck," she whispered. "In the in-between." "Yeah," Damon said. "But at least now we have company." The connection between them shifted then. It settled. The frantic energy of the initial bond cooled into something solid. It wasn't a romance yet, not really. It was an alliance, a pact of mutual survival. Vixara leaned her head on his shoulder. It was a bold move, breaking a dozen protocols Kalen had listed, but Damon didn't pull away. He felt the heat of the foxfire, the hum of power that radiated from her, but it didn't hurt. It felt like sitting next to a fireplace on a cold night. "You are not a suitor," Vixara murmured, her eyes closing. "Suitors want something. You just want to be." "I am a simple man," Damon said. "I like simple things." They sat there for what might have been an hour, or maybe a minute. Time was hard to track in the chamber. Finally, Vixara sat up. She looked tired, drained, but her eyes were clear. The golden light in them was steady. "You should go," she said. Damon blinked. "Kicking me out already? I thought things were going well." "You are exhausted, Damon," Vixara said seriously. "Your biosigns are fluctuating. Just because you can handle the field doesn't mean it isn't taxing your body. It is radiation. It is pressure. You need to sleep in a room with straight walls. You need to reset." She stood up and offered him a hand. He took it, pulling himself up. The contact sent a pleasant shiver up his arm, but no shock. "Most people who touch me have to go into a sleep tank for a week," Vixara said, "or therapy for a year." Damon stretched his back, cracking. My therapy is a large espresso and watching the shuttles take off from the observation deck. I think I will stick to that. Promise me you will rest, Vixara insisted. She looked worried. She didn't want to be the reason he burned out. I promise, Damon said. I will sleep like a log. A very boring, non-magical log. They walked back to the entrance of the chamber. The hallway seemed shorter this time, less twisted. The walls were still shifting, but they seemed to part way for Damon, acknowledging him as a guest rather than an intruder. At the threshold where the dissolving stone door stood, waiting, Damon stopped. He looked back at the chamber. It was still a mess of physics and emotion, a chaotic storm of a room. But it didn't look like a dungeon anymore. It looked like a home that just needed a little bit of organizing. Tomorrow, Damon asked. Vixara stood with her hands clasped her tails, glowing softly in the dim light. She looked small, but she was smiling. A real smile. Tomorrow, she said. I will try to keep the gravity at 1G. I appreciate that, Damon said. See you, Vixara. See you, Damon. He stepped through the threshold. The stone mist solidified behind him, sealing the foxfire away. The hallway of the isolation ward felt shockingly sterile. The air was dead. The lights were white and harsh. The floor was hard, and didn't care how he felt. Damon leaned against the wall for a moment, letting the dizziness pass. He felt heavy. His body felt like a lead weight after the buoyancy of the chamber. Dr. Syra was there, along with Ambassador Hale. They looked at him as if he were a ghost. He is walking, Hale whispered to the doctor. How is he walking? I don't know, Dr. Syra replied, checking her datapad frantically. His cortisol levels are high, but his synaptic firing is harmonious. He is not in shock. He is in resonance. Damon pushed himself off the wall and walked past them. Mr. Reed, Dr. Syra called out. We need to run scans. We need to debrief. Tomorrow, doctor, Damon said, not breaking stride. Right now, I have a date with a pillow. He walked down the long, empty corridor toward his quarters. He felt the phantom warmth of Vixara's hand in his. He felt the echo of her loneliness and the relief of her laughter. He looked out of a viewport at the station Unity Biosphere ring, spinning slowly in the distance. People called him brave. They thought bravery was walking into the fire once and surviving. Damon shook his head. That wasn't bravery. That was just adrenaline. Bravery was knowing that the fire was hot, knowing that it would hurt, knowing that it would take everything you had to stay standing, and deciding to go back in tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because she was worth it. Damon smiled to himself, a tired, crooked smile. 53 guys, he muttered. They didn't know what they were missing. He put his hands in his pockets and whistled a tune as he walked away from the danger zone, already planning his route back. The Grand Assembly Hall felt different this time. 2 days ago, Damon Reed had sat in the back row, a bored cargo pilot betting on which ambassador would fall asleep first. Today, he stood at the very center of the room, on a raised dais, made of iridescent crystal, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. The hall was packed. Every seat was filled. The air buzzed with the hum of thousands of translation drones and the hushed whispers of delegates who had come to watch the human explode. You look stiff, Ambassador Hale whispered from somewhere behind him. Relax your shoulders. You look like you are bracing for impact. I am bracing for impact, Damon muttered through his teeth. This suit costs more than my ship. If I trip and rip it, the Coalition will garnish my wages for the next 3 lifetimes. The suit was indeed magnificent. It was a formal Earth Coalition dress uniform, but modified with Vulpine aesthetics. It was midnight blue with silver threading that caught the light, making him look like he was wrapped in a slice of the night sky. It felt heavy, stiff, and completely unnatural. Just stand there and try not to drool when the princess arrives, Hale hissed. And for the love of Earth, do not make any jokes about gravity. No promises, Damon said. A hush fell over the room. The massive double doors swung open, and the Vulpine delegation entered. Queen Zaira led the procession, her white fur gleaming her presence, as imposing as a thunderstorm. But Damon didn't look at the queen. His eyes went to the figure walking behind her, Vixara. She was wearing a ceremonial gown that seemed to be woven from the fabric of a sunset, shades of deep orange gold and violet that shifted as she moved. Her head was held high, her ears perked forward. The foxfire around her had been dampened by suppression cuffs on her wrists, but it still leaked out. The air around her shimmered like a heat haze on a tarmac. As she passed the rows of delegates, people flinched. Some looked away, rubbing their eyes as the visual distortion made them dizzy. Others leaned back, instinctively recoiling from the raw, emotional pressure she radiated. She was a storm contained in a bottle, walking through a room of glass figurines. But when she reached the dais and looked at Damon, the storm calmed. Her golden eyes met his, and for a second the thousands of people watching vanished. It was just the two of them. Damon saw the fear in her eyes. It was buried deep, hidden behind royal training, but it was there. She was terrified that he would change his mind. She was terrified that under the pressure of the ceremony, with the whole galaxy watching, he would finally see her as too much trouble and walk away. Damon offered her a small, crooked smile. It wasn't a diplomatic smile. It was the smile he gave his co-pilot after a rough landing, the one that said, "We are alive." That was messy. Let's do it again. Vixara's shoulders relaxed by a fraction of an inch. A tiny spark of hope flared in her eyes. Queen Zaira ascended the dais and stood between them. She looked at Damon, her gaze sweeping over him with critical approval. "You showed up," Zaira said, her voice amplified so that it reached every corner of the hall. "I promised I would," Damon said. "And the catering smelled good." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Zaira ignored it, though her whiskers twitched with amusement. "We are gathered here," Zaira announced, "to witness the covenant of the dual stars, a binding of two souls, a bridging of two realities." She gestured to an attendant, who brought forward a cushion, holding a large glowing crystal. It was jagged, pulsing, with a rhythm that matched the beat of Damon's heart. "This is the Covenant Stone," Zaira explained. "It will act as a conduit. It will take a thread of the foxfire from the princess and weave it permanently into the neural pathways of her consort." She looked at Damon gravely. "This is not a ring you can take off, Damon Reed. This is a rewrite of your existence. Once the bond is formed, you will share her reality. You will feel what she feels. You will see the world through the lens of the foxfire. There is no shielding that can block it." "I understand," Damon said. "Do you?" Zaira pressed. "Do you understand that for the next 6 months, you will live in the eye of the hurricane? If you break, the bond will shatter your mind." Damon looked at Vixara. He saw the girl who had been locked in a room for 3 years because everyone was too scared to hold her hand. He saw the loneliness that was louder than the void. "I understand," Damon said, his voice steady. "But a hurricane is just wind if you know how to fly through it." Zaira nodded slowly. "Then let the covenant begin." She placed her hand over the crystal. Vixara placed her hand on one side. Damon placed his on the other. The moment his skin touched the cold stone, the world vanished. It wasn't like the handshake in the chamber. That had been a splash of cold water. This was a tidal wave. Damon gasped as the energy surged up his arm. It wasn't pain. It was more. It was an overload of sensory data. He felt Vixara's heartbeat in his own chest. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. He felt her anxiety, a sharp buzzing static in the back of his teeth. He felt her hope, a warm golden light that tasted like honey. And then, the connection went deeper. He felt the foxfire itself. It wasn't just emotion. It was a living force, a connection to the underlying chaotic math of the universe. He saw the room, not as walls and chairs, but as probability waves and energy fields. The faces of the delegates blurred into smears of light. The ceiling of the hall dissolved into a vortex of equations. For a second, Damon felt the familiar vertigo. The floor was gone. He was falling. Steady, Vixara's voice whispered in his mind. "Do not look down. Look at me." Damon focused. He found Vixara in the chaos. She was the anchor. She was the sun in the center of the solar system. He locked onto her. He visualized his mind wrapping around hers, not to contain it, but to hold it. Gotcha, Damon thought. The chaos stabilized. The room didn't return to normal. The walls were still breathing, and the colors were still too bright, but it stopped spinning. It settled into a rhythm. It was a new normal, a shared reality. He opened his eyes. Vixara was staring at him, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. "You are loud," she whispered, her voice echoing in his head and his ears simultaneously. "I have been told I have no inside voice," Damon replied, grinning. Queen Zaira removed her hand from the crystal. The blinding light faded, but the connection remained. It was a hum in Damon's bones, a second pulse in his wrist. "It is done," Zaira proclaimed. She turned to the assembly. "For 6 standard months, Damon Reed and Princess Vixara are bound by the covenant. They will live together. They will rule together. If at the end of this trial, they both stand unbroken, the bond shall be made eternal." She paused, looking out at the stunned faces of the diplomats. "And if any of you wish to challenge the validity of this union," Zaira added, her voice dropping to a growl, "you are welcome to step into the foxfire and try to do better." Silence. Absolute terrified silence. Then slowly, Ambassador Hale began to clap. It was a lonely sound at first, but then the humans joined in. Then the warrior species, respecting the sheer audacity of the act. Then the rest of the hall. It wasn't thunderous applause. It was the polite, confused applause of people who had just watched someone jump off a cliff and somehow land on their feet. Damon didn't care about the applause. He was too busy trying to figure out why he could taste the color blue. "Hey," he whispered to Vixara as the queen continued her speech. "Is it normal for my left foot to feel like it is vibrating?" "Yes," Vixara whispered back, wiping her eyes. "That is the resonance. It will fade, or you will get used to it." "Great," Damon said. "Also, I think I left the stove on in my quarters. Can you check with your psychic powers?" Vixara let out a snort of laughter that was entirely unprincess-like. "You do not have a stove, Damon. You have a nutrient dispenser." "Right," Damon said. "Just checking." They stood there on the dais, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy, cracking jokes about appliances, while their souls were fused together. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was perfect. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustments. They were moved to a new suite in the diplomatic spire, a set of rooms specially designed to withstand the foxfire. The walls were reinforced with dampening fields, and the furniture was bolted down, a lesson learned after a particularly funny joke from Damon caused the sofa to float up to the ceiling. It wasn't easy. Living with Vixara meant living in a constant state of flux. Some mornings, Damon would wake up and the gravity in the bedroom would be half strength, making him bounce when he walked. Other days, if Vixara was sad, it would rain inside the living room, literal cold rain falling from the ceiling. But they adapted. Damon learned to read the weather of the room. If the lights turned green, she would be happy. If the air smelled like ozone, she was stressed. If the walls started to curve inward, she was feeling trapped. And Vixara learned to lean on him. She learned that when the foxfire got too loud, when the emotions threatened to overwhelm her, she could reach out and find Damon's mind. He was solid. He was simple. He was a rock in the stream. One evening, 3 months into the covenant, they were standing on the balcony of their suite, looking out at the station's exterior. The view was magnificent ships, docking and departing the endless dance of commerce and travel. Vixara was leaning against the railing. The foxfire was quiet tonight, just a soft ambient glow that made her fur look like spun gold. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. Damon looked up from his mug of coffee, real coffee imported at great expense by Ambassador Hale as a bribe to keep Damon happy. "Miss what? Flying," Vixara said. The silence. The normal world where walls stay straight. Damon took a sip of coffee. He looked at a freighter drifting past its navigation lights blinking. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss the simplicity. I miss knowing that if I put a cup down, it will stay there." Vixara looked down, her ears flattening. "I knew it. You are tired of the chaos." "I didn't say that," Damon said. He put his cup down on the railing. "I said I miss the simplicity. I didn't say I wanted it back." He turned to her. "You know, before I met you, I was just drifting. I was going from port to port, paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't really living. I was just existing, waiting for something to happen." He reached out and took her hand. The connection flared, a warm, familiar hum. "This," Damon said, gesturing between them. "This is real. It is messy. It is loud. It gives me a headache sometimes, but it is real. I would rather be here dealing with indoor rain and floating furniture than back in that cockpit alone." Vixara looked at him, her eyes shining. "You are a strange human, Damon Reed." "So, you keep telling me," Damon said. "But you love me." It was the first time he had said it out loud. Vixara froze. The foxfire spiked a brilliant, blinding flash of white light that lit up the entire balcony. Then she smiled. It was a smile that outshone the energy field. "Yes," she whispered. "I suppose I do." The 6 months ended not with a bang, but with a signature. They stood in Queen Zaira's private office. The Queen sat behind her desk, looking at the two of them with an expression that was hard to read. "The trial period is over," Zaira said. "The covenant has held. The medical reports indicate that Damon's neural pathways have not only survived, but adapted. He is for all intents and purposes a stable anchor for the foxfire." She clasped her hands. "You have a choice. You can dissolve the bond now. You can walk away, Damon. You will be compensated. You will be given a hero's retirement. You will be free." She looked at Vixara. "Or you can sign the permanent registry. The bond becomes eternal. You will be a consort. You will be royalty. And you will never have a quiet day again for the rest of your life." Damon didn't look at the Queen. He looked at Vixara. She wasn't looking at him with fear anymore. She was looking at him with trust. "Do you want to be free?" Vixara asked him softly. Damon laughed. "I was never free, Vixara. I was just lost." He picked up the stylus. He didn't read the contract. He didn't check the fine print about liability or death benefits. "Besides," Damon said, signing his name with a flourish, "I finally got the gravity in the bedroom calibrated to my liking. I'd hate to waste that effort." Vixara laughed, and the sound made the crystals on the Queen's desk chime in harmony. She took the stylus and signed her name next to his. Queen Zaira watched them, and for the first time a genuine smile broke through her regal mask. "Then it is done," the Queen said. "Welcome to the family, Damon. Try not to break anything expensive." Later that night, Damon and Vixara stood by the large viewport in their suite. The lights were dimmed. The station rotated slowly beneath them, a wheel of lights against the darkness. Vixara's tails were wrapped loosely around Damon's waist, glowing with a soft, contented blue light. Damon's arm was around her shoulders. "So," Damon said, "what happens now?" "Now," Vixara said. "Now we have diplomatic receptions, trade negotiations, charity balls, the boring stuff." "Sounds terrible," Damon said. "I can't wait." He looked at his reflection in the glass. He didn't look like a cargo pilot anymore. He looked like a man who had found his place. He looked at Vixara. She didn't look like a curse anymore. She looked like a queen. Hey, Damon said. Do you think we can sneak out tomorrow? Go down to the docking bay. I want to show you my old ship. Can the tin be held together by duct tape? Vixara asked, raising an eyebrow. Hey, she has character, Damon defended. And she has a great view of the nebula, Vixara smiled. She leaned her head against his chest. I would like that, she said. But if the engine explodes, I am not fixing it. Deal, Damon said. They stood there watching the stars slide by. The foxfire pulsed, gently weaving around Damon's wrist like a ribbon of light. He didn't pull away. He didn't flinch. The world was still bent. The universe was still chaotic. But for the first time in the history of the Vulpine Curse, the suitor